I'm Sophia, 32 female. I live alone in a quiet suburban neighborhood in a house I worked tirelessly to afford. As a senior data analyst, my life is structured, logical, and blessedly predictable, or at least it was. My little corner of the world was my sanctuary, the one place where I could decompress from a demanding job and simply be myself. The story I'm about to tell is about how that sanctuary was violated in the most surreal and audacious way imaginable, not by a stranger, but by my own flesh and blood, my sister, Lucy. It involves scented candles, a shocking abuse of trust, and a wildly inaccurate understanding of property law that ultimately cost her thousands. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My relationship with my younger sister, Lucy, has always been complicated. At 28, 4 years my junior, she still seemed to be navigating life with the whimsical, often frustrating, impulsiveness of a teenager. While I was meticulously planning my career path, saving for a down payment, and color-coding my spreadsheets, Lucy was hopping from one passion project to another. One month she was a painter, the next a jewelry maker, then a social media influencer specializing in vintage teacups. Each venture was announced with breathless enthusiasm and usually abandoned within weeks, often leaving a trail of expensive, unused supplies in its wake. Our parents, bless their hearts, enabled this behavior. They saw her as the creative spirit of the family, while I was the responsible one. It was a label I both appreciated and resented. It meant they trusted me, but it also meant I was the one they called when Lucy's car broke down or she was, yet again, between jobs and short on rent. When I finally bought my own house, it was the proudest moment of my life. It was a modest 2-bedroom bungalow with a detached garage, a small yard, and most importantly, it was all mine. It represented years of sacrifice, late nights at the office, and a relentless focus on my goals. During the housewarming party, my parents suggested I give Lucy a spare key. "You know, just in case of an emergency," my mom said, her voice laced with that familiar, gentle pressure. "She lives closer than we do. What if you lock yourself out?" I hesitated. My instincts screamed no. Giving Lucy a key felt like giving a toddler a permanent marker in a white room. But the whole family was there, smiling, and Lucy put on her most earnest, doe-eyed expression. "I'll be super responsible, Soph, I promise. I'd never use it unless you were, like, trapped under a bookcase or something." Against my better judgment, I relented and handed over a freshly cut key. It was a decision that would unravel my peaceful, orderly life. For the first few months, the key was a non-issue. Lucy never used it, and I almost forgot she had it. The slow creep began subtly. It started with packages. I'd get a notification on my phone that a delivery had been made, but when I got home from work, there would be nothing on my porch. A quick text to Lucy would solve the mystery. "Oh, yeah, I saw that on your porch and didn't want it to get stolen, so I used the key and put it in your hall. Hope that's okay." The first time, I thanked her for being so thoughtful. The second time, I told her she could have just texted me. The third time, I asked her to please stop entering my house without my permission. She acted wounded, as if I were accusing her of some great crime. "I was just trying to help, Sophia. Gosh, you don't have to be so paranoid." Then came the borrowing. A bottle of wine would be missing from my rack, a new sweater I hadn't even worn yet would vanish from my closet, or my expensive shampoo would seem to be depleting at an alarming rate. When confronted, she'd have a breezy excuse for everything. "Oh, I was having a crisis and needed a drink, you're the best sister ever." Or, "I had a last-minute date and nothing to wear, I was totally going to wash it and bring it back." Each time she made me feel like I was the unreasonable one for being upset. It was classic Lucy behavior, blurring boundaries and then acting like the victim when called out on it. I talked to my best friend, Sarah, about it over coffee. "You need to get that key back," Sarah said, her expression firm. She was a high school history teacher and had a no-nonsense approach to everything. "This is your house, not a community center for the creatively unemployed." She was right, of course. I resolved to ask for the key back, but I kept putting it off, dreading the inevitable dramatic outburst and the subsequent guilt trip from our parents. I told myself it was just minor annoyances and I could handle it. I was a master of handling things, after all. That was my role. The garage was my domain. It wasn't just a pla. See to park my car, it was my project space. I was slowly renovating a vintage motorcycle, a hobby that was the complete antithesis of my day job. It was greasy, mechanical, and wonderfully tangible. The garage held my tools, my bike parts, and the satisfying scent of oil and metal. It was organized, labeled, and pristine in its own way. Lucy had never shown the slightest interest in it. To her, it was just a dusty concrete box. So when I started noticing things slightly out of place, I initially dismissed it. A wrench not in its designated spot, a tarp folded differently, a faint, unfamiliar smell. I travel for work occasionally, short 2 or 3 day trips for conferences. It was after one of these trips that the signs became undeniable. I came home on a Thursday evening, exhausted and ready for the weekend. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the side door to the garage was ajar. My heart sank. Had someone broken in? I cautiously pushed the door open, my phone in hand, ready to call the police. But it wasn't a robbery. It was something far, far stranger. The air was thick with the cloying scent of vanilla and lavender, and in the corner, tucked behind my motorcycle, was a large cardboard box filled with what looked like dozens of homemade candles. My first reaction was utter confusion. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind struggling to process the scene. Candles? Why were there candles in my garage? I walked over to the box and picked one up. It was in a small glass jar with a handwritten label that read Serenity Glow. The scent was overpowering. I looked around. Nothing seemed to be stolen. My tools were all there, the expensive parts for my motorcycle were untouched. It didn't feel like a break-in, it felt like an intrusion. My brain immediately supplied the most likely culprit, Lucy. But why? Of all her fleeting passions, candle making had never been one of them. And why my garage? It made no sense. I called her immediately. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hey, Soph, how was your trip?" "Lucy, were you in my garage?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries. There was a slight pause. "Oh, yeah, just for a sec. I needed to borrow your hammer. Mine broke." "A hammer? Lucy, there's a giant box of candles in here." Another pause, longer this time. "Oh, that, right. Okay, so don't be mad, but my friend needed a place to store some stuff for her craft fair, like just for a day or two. My apartment is way too small. I figured you wouldn't mind since you have so much space." The lie was so smooth, so practiced. It was infuriating. I had explicitly told her I didn't want her using my house as a storage unit for her or her friends. "We've talked about this, Lucy," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "You can't just dump things here. And you definitely can't do it without asking me first. I want this box gone by tomorrow." Okay, chill out. It'll be gone by tomorrow afternoon. It's not a big deal," she said, her tone shifting from apologetic to defensive. She hung up before I could say anything else. I spent the rest of the evening fuming. It wasn't just the box, it was the principle of the thing. It was the blatant disregard for my rules and my space. The next day, I left for work, annoyed but expecting the box to be gone when I returned. When I got home that evening, I went straight to the garage. The box was still there. I texted Lucy, "The candles are still here." A few minutes later, she replied, "So sorry, my friend got held up. She'll get them tomorrow for sure. Pinky promise?" I didn't believe her for a second, but I was too tired to fight. I had a major project deadline and couldn't afford the mental energy to argue with her. The 1 or 2 days stretched into a week. The box of candles was joined by a second, larger box filled with jars, wicks, and blocks of colored wax. I called her again, my patience worn paper-thin. This time, her story changed. "Okay, fine, it's my stuff," she admitted with a heavy sigh, as if I were forcing a confession for a capital crime. "It's for my new business. I'm starting an artisanal candle company." I almost laughed. Of course, she was. Another week, another grand business venture. "And you decided to launch this business in my garage?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "My apartment smells like wax all the time, and the landlord complained," she whined. "I was going to ask you, but I knew you'd overreact and say no. It's not hurting anything, Soph. I'm just storing supplies there for now. I'll be out of your way as soon as I find a proper workshop." I should have put my foot down then and there. I should have demanded she remove every last wick and jar immediately. But a part of me, the part that had been conditioned for years to be the responsible one, felt a sliver of guilt. What if this was the one idea that actually stuck? Was it so terrible to let her store a few boxes in a garage I wasn't using? G to its full potential? Fine, I said, the word tasting like defeat. You can keep them here for 2 weeks. That's it, Lucy. 2 weeks to find a proper space. But you are not to come and go as you please. You text me when you need to get something, and we arrange a time. She agreed, showering me with promises and thank yous. I thought I had set a firm boundary. I was wrong. I had just given her an inch, and she was already planning to take a mile. Over the next week, the signs of her secret invasion grew more frequent and more bizarre. I'd come home from work and find my outdoor trash bin full of empty wax bags and fragrance oil bottles. One afternoon, I found a glitter spill on the driveway near the garage door, shimmering obnoxiously in the sun. The faint scent of ocean breeze and pumpkin spice now seemed to permanently linger in the air. The final, undeniable clue came from my electricity bill. I track my expenses meticulously, and I noticed a significant spike in my usage for the past month. It was nearly double the usual amount. I couldn't understand it. I hadn't been using the AC more than usual, and all my appliances were energy efficient. I called the power company, convinced there had been a mistake. They confirmed the reading was accurate. As I stood in my kitchen, staring at the bill, a cold dread washed over me. There was only one place that could be drawing that much power. With a heavy heart, I walked out to the garage. The side door was locked, as it should be, but as I got closer, I heard it, a low, distinct humming sound coming from within. It was the sound of something running, something that had no business being in my garage. The humming sound was my breaking point. All the small, nagging suspicions of the past few weeks, the strange smells, the misplaced items, the astronomical electricity bill, coalesced into a single, infuriating certainty. Lucy was doing more than just storing things in my garage. She was working in there. She was running her business out of my house, behind my back, using my electricity. The sheer audacity of it sent a hot surge of anger through me. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a blurred boundary anymore. This was a calculated deception. I decided I wasn't going to confront her over the phone. I wanted to see her face when she was caught red-handed. The next day was a Saturday, and I knew she typically treated weekends as her prime, hustle time. I decided to leave the house early in the morning, making it seem like I was gone for the day. I texted my friend Sarah. Operation Garage Recon is a go. I think I'm about to find a secret candle factory on my property. She replied almost instantly with a string of popcorn emojis. I drove to a coffee shop a few blocks away, bought a latte I didn't want, and waited. My plan was simple. I'd give her an hour to think I was gone and get settled in, then I would return home and walk in on her. The wait was excruciating. Every minute felt like an hour. I pictured the scene in my head a dozen times, each scenario ending with me finally getting the upper hand. At precisely 10:30 a.m., I drove back home, parking my car down the street so she wouldn't see it. I walked quietly up my driveway, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the garage, the humming was louder, and I could smell that sickly sweet mix of a dozen different candle scents. I took a deep breath, unlocked the side door with my own key, and pushed it open. The sight that greeted me was worse than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a few boxes and a hot plate. My garage had been transformed. My neatly organized tool chests had been pushed against one wall. My motorcycle was covered in a dust sheet and shoved into a corner. In their place stood a full-fledged production line. There were 2 large, industrial-looking wax melters humming away, plugged into a heavy-duty extension cord that was snaked through a small window, and I now realized with horror, plugged into an outlet on the exterior of my house. There were shelves, which I had not installed, lined with hundreds of candles in various stages of completion. There were piles of shipping boxes, a label printer, and a laptop open on a makeshift table. And in the middle of it all stood Lucy, wearing an apron smudged with colored wax, stirring a pot of molten liquid, and humming along to music playing from a small Bluetooth speaker. She didn't hear me enter. She was completely in her element, the queen of her stolen castle. For a moment, I was too stunned to speak. The scale of the deception was breathtaking. This wasn't a temporary solution. This was a semi-permanent settlement. She had methodically and secretly moved an entire small business into my private space. "What," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "is all this?" Lucy jumped, startled, and spun around. The ladle she was holding clattered to the floor, splashing hot pink wax onto the concrete. When she saw me, her face went through. A rapid series of emotions. Shock, then fear, then a familiar, defiant indignation. "Sophia, you scared me. I thought you were gone for the day." "Clearly," I said, my eyes sweeping across the chaotic scene. "What is this, Lucy? I told you 2 weeks of storage for a few boxes. This is not a few boxes. This is a factory. You're running a business out of my garage." "I was going to tell you," she insisted, her voice rising. "It just kind of grew faster than I expected. People love my candles. I'm getting so many orders on Etsy. I was going to start paying you rent, I swear." "Rent? You think this is about rent?" I was practically shouting now. "You lied to me. You have been sneaking in here every day, using my electricity, completely taking over my space without my permission. My latest power bill was double what it should be. Did you think I wouldn't notice?" This is where the conversation took a turn from a family dispute into the theater of the absurd. Lucy, seeing that her apologies and excuses were failing, switched tactics. She crossed her arms, lifted her chin, and deployed the line that would detonate any remaining sisterly affection I had for her. "Well, you weren't using the garage anyway," she said matter-of-factly. "And technically, since I've been operating my business from here for over a month and I have a key, I have rights." I stared at her dumbfounded. "Rights? What on earth are you talking about?" "Squatters' rights," she said, with an air of unearned confidence, as if she were a seasoned legal scholar. I looked it up. If someone establishes residency, even in a non-traditional space, you can't just kick them out. You have to go through a formal eviction process. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat. It was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. She had taken a sliver of misunderstood legal information from some internet forum and twisted it into a shield for her outrageous behavior. She wasn't just a freeloader. She was a freeloader with a warped sense of entitlement and a tenuous grasp of the law. "You think you have squatters' rights to my garage because you've been secretly making candles in it for a few weeks?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "That's not how it works, Lucy. That's not how any of this works." "We'll see about that," she sniffed, turning her back on me to inspect her spilled wax. "You can't just throw me and my business out on the street." The sheer, unmitigated gall of that statement solidified my resolve. The time for being the responsible one, the understanding sister, was over. She had declared war, armed with a nonsensical legal theory and a batch of Serenity Glow candles. And I, the owner of the battlefield, was about to show her just how wrong she was. For a few moments after Lucy's grand declaration of squatters' rights, I was speechless. My anger was so immense, so pure, that it felt like a physical force, pressing all the air out of my lungs. She had turned back to her wax-melting pots, acting as if the conversation was over and she had won. The humming of the machines filled the tense silence. I realized then that arguing with her in that moment was pointless. She was living in a fantasy world where her desires superseded things like property laws, respect, and basic decency. Reasoning with her was like trying to explain calculus to a cat. I needed a different approach. I needed facts, evidence, and leverage. I turned around without another word and walked out of the garage, closing the door firmly behind me. I could feel her surprised stare on my back. Back in the sanctuary of my house, I took several deep breaths to steady my nerves and started to think logically, like the data analyst I was. My first call was to my best friend, Sarah. I recounted the entire insane conversation, culminating in the squatters' rights claim. Sarah listened patiently before letting out a long, low whistle. "Wow. That is a level of delusion I usually only see in freshmen who think they can write a 10-page history paper the night before it's due," she said. "So, what's your plan? Please tell me it involves a very large padlock." "Oh, it will," I assured her. "But I need to be smart about this. She thinks she has some legal standing. I need to prove unequivocally that she doesn't, and I want to understand the full extent of what she's been doing." Sarah's boyfriend, Kyle, was a lawyer. While property law wasn't his specialty, he was my first thought. "Could you ask Kyle for a quick, informal opinion on this? I just need to confirm that she's as full of it as I think she is." Sarah promised she would. My next step was to gather my own evidence. I went to my office and pulled up my electricity bills for the past year. The spike in usage lined up perfectly with when the mystery boxes started appearing. I downloaded the detailed usage data, which showed massive consumption during daytime hours on weekdays when I was at work and the house should have been empty. It was a clear, undeniable pattern. Exhibit A next, I thought about her business. She de-mentioned Etsy. On a hunch, I went to the site and searched for Serenity Glow. And there it was. A fully functional online shop, complete with a folksy, completely fabricated backstory. From my charming home workshop to your living room, the bio read, "Each Serenity Glow candle is hand-poured with love and positive intentions." It was accompanied by a photo of a smiling Lucy holding a candle, and in the blurred background, I could just make out the distinctive pegboard where I hung my wrenches. She was using my garage as a backdrop for her fraudulent marketing. The shop had over 100 sales and dozens of glowing reviews. I scrolled through them, a knot tightening in my stomach. She wasn't just playing around, she was running a real, albeit illegal, operation. I checked the business shipping address listed on her public profile. She had been clever enough not to use my address, listing a P.O. box instead. But then I saw it. A section for local pickup. She had an option for local buyers to bypass shipping and pick up their orders directly. Where, I wondered, was she meeting them? The thought that she might have been giving strangers my address, inviting them onto my property, sent a chill down my spine. My investigation took an even darker turn when I started thinking about the materials she was using. Industrial wax melters, fragrance oils, hot wax. These things weren't just taking up space, they were a hazard. I did a quick search for my city's regulations on home-based businesses. The rules were strict. Operating any kind of business that involved flammable materials or generated fumes from a residential property, especially one not zoned for it, was a major violation of city ordinances. It required special permits, inspections from the fire department, and specific business insurance. I was willing to bet my entire life savings that Lucy had none of those things. This meant that if a fire started in that garage, my homeowner's insurance would be completely void. She hadn't just exposed me to a massive electricity bill, she had exposed me to catastrophic financial risk. The full weight of her recklessness hit me. This was no longer just about a sisterly squabble. She had put my entire life's work, my biggest asset, in jeopardy. Later that afternoon, Sarah called back. "Okay, I talked to Kyle," she said. His first reaction was to laugh for about 2 solid minutes. His second, professional reaction is that Lucy's claim is, and I quote, "more full of holes than a block of Swiss cheese." He said squatters' rights are extremely complex and vary by state, but they universally do not apply to someone who was initially given permissive access, like with a key, and is essentially a guest who has overstayed their welcome. And they certainly don't apply to a secret, illegal business being run in a garage. He said the legal term for her is a licensee, and her license to be on your property has been revoked. You have every right to demand she leave and remove her property immediately. This confirmation was the final piece I needed. The anger that had been simmering all day now cooled into a hard, clear resolve. I wasn't just going to get her out. I was going to make her understand the consequences of her actions. I started drafting an email. It was addressed to Lucy, but I also CC'd our parents. I wanted them to see the full, unvarnished truth of what their creative spirit had been up to. The subject line was simple: formal notice to vacate and cease operations at my address. In the body of the email, I laid out the facts, point by point, with the cold precision of a data report. I attached the electricity bills, a screenshot of her Etsy shop with my garage in the background, and a link to the city's ordinances on home-based businesses. I concluded with a clear, non-negotiable deadline. She had 48 hours to remove every single item of her property from my garage. If anything was left after that time, it would be considered abandoned, and I would have it disposed of at her expense. It was time to stop being the responsible sister and start being the responsible homeowner. I hit send on the email and felt a wave of calm wash over me. I had laid out my case logically and dispassionately. There were no emotional accusations, only facts. I had documented her deception, calculated the immediate financial cost, and outlined the enormous legal and insurance risks she had exposed me to. I had also, very deliberately, included our parents. For years, they had mediated our disputes, almost always siding with Lucy and encouraging me to be more understanding. This time, I wanted them to be fully informed, to see the evidence for themselves before Lucy could spin her narrative of victimhood. The fallout was immediate. Less than 10 minutes after I sent the email, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Sophia, what is this email?" she asked, her voice tight with a familiar blend of confusion and disapproval. "You're kicking your sister out? It sounds so harsh, so legal." "Did you read the attachments, Mom?" I asked, keeping my own voice level. "Did you see the electricity bill? Did you read the city ordinance about operating a business with flammable materials in a residential zone?" There was a pause. "Well, I skimmed them," she admitted. "But surely this is just a misunderstanding. Lucy said she was going to pay you for the electricity. She's just trying to get on her feet. You have so much space in that garage, and you're hardly ever in there." It was the exact response I had expected. They saw a family squabble, not a serious legal and financial liability. They saw me as the successful, stable daughter being mean to the struggling, artistic one. "Mom, this isn't a misunderstanding," I stated firmly. "This is about my safety and my financial security. If that garage catches fire because of her uninspected, illegal equipment, I lose everything. My insurance won't cover it. Are you and Dad prepared to help me buy a new house when mine burns down?" That stopped her. The idea of such a tangible, devastating consequence seemed to finally break through the fog of family harmony. She stammered for a moment before saying she needed to talk to my father. 20 minutes later, Lucy herself called, and she was not calm. She was screaming. "How could you?" she shrieked into the phone. "You sent that to Mom and Dad? You're trying to turn them against me. You're trying to ruin my business. I told you I have rights." "Lucy, you have no rights here," I said, my Patty. "Ensagon, you are a guest who has abused my trust and broken the law on my property. My friend's boyfriend, who is a lawyer, confirmed it. You have 48 hours. The clock started when I sent the email. If you're not out by then, I'm changing the locks and calling a junk removal service." I hung up before she could scream again. The next 24 hours were a storm of manipulative texts from Lucy and pleading phone calls from my parents. Lucy's messages ranged from furious, "You're a jealous, bitter shrew who can't stand to see me succeed," to pitiful, "My whole life is in that garage, you're destroying my dreams." My parents, meanwhile, urged me to find a compromise. "Maybe you could just let her stay for another month or two until she finds a new place," my dad suggested. "No," I said, my voice like steel. The compromise was me allowing her to store things for 2 weeks. She chose to violate that compromise in every way imaginable. The discussion is over. I knew that to win this, I had to be unshakable. Any sign of wavering would be seen as an opening for them to wear me down. So I stood my ground. That evening, I went to the hardware store. I bought the heaviest-duty padlock and hasp I could find. Installing it was therapeutic. With each turn of the screwdriver, I felt like I was reclaiming my space, reinforcing my boundaries not just with metal, but with intention. The solid, satisfying click of the padlock snapping shut was one of the best sounds I had ever heard. I now had the only key. She could no longer come and go as she pleased. The next day, the day of the deadline, I worked from home. I wanted to be there to see it through. Around noon, my parents' car pulled into the driveway. They got out, their faces grim. Lucy was in the passenger seat, refusing to look at me. My dad approached me cautiously. "Sophia, can't we just talk this through?" "We did talk, Dad. I sent an email with all the facts." "She has until 5 p.m. Is she here to pack her things?" I asked, crossing my arms. he sighed, defeated. She needs help moving it all. For the next 5 hours, I sat in my living room and watched as my sister, my father, and eventually my mother, who couldn't bear to see her daughter struggle alone, hauled box after box of candles, wax, jars, and equipment out of my garage. It was an astonishing amount of stuff, far more than I had realized. It filled the entire driveway. Lucy shot me hateful glares the entire time, muttering under her breath. My parents looked exhausted and miserable. At 4:45 p.m., with the garage finally empty, Lucy made one last stand. She had rented a small storage unit but clearly hadn't thought about the logistics of moving everything. "This isn't going to fit in my car," she said, gesturing to the mountain of her failed enterprise. "I'll have to leave some of it here on the driveway and come back for it tomorrow with a truck." I walked over to her, my expression unyielding. "No," I said. "The deadline is 5 p.m. Everything has to be off my property. If you leave it here, it's abandoned and I will have it hauled away first thing in the morning. The invoice for the removal service will be sent to you." My father stepped in. "Honey, be reasonable. It's a lot of stuff." "I am being reasonable," I replied, looking him straight in the eye. I gave her 48 hours' notice. Poor planning on her part does not constitute an emergency on mine. The finality in my voice left no room for argument. Defeated, my dad ended up calling a friend with a truck to help, making multiple trips to the storage unit. By 8 p.m., my driveway was finally clear. The garage stood empty, silent, and smelling faintly of vanilla. The war was over, but I knew the battle for accountability had just begun. With the garage empty and the new padlock gleaming on the door, a profound sense of relief washed over me. It felt like I had just fumigated my life, expelling a pest that had been slowly eating away at my peace of mind. The air itself felt lighter. That evening, I went into the garage for the first time since the forced exodus. The smell of artificial fragrance still lingered, but beneath it, I could smell the familiar, comforting scent of oil and concrete. My motorcycle was dusty but unharmed. My tools were disorganized but all there. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously cleaning and reorganizing, putting everything back in its rightful place. It was a ritual of reclamation. With every wrench I hung on its proper hook, I felt my control over my own life solidifying. The silence from my family was deafening. After the final truckload of candle supplies pulled away, my parents left with a brief, weary goodbye. Lucy, of course, didn't say a word, just shot me a look of pure venom before getting into her car. For the next few days, there was nothing. No angry texts, no pleading phone calls. It was an uneasy peace. I knew the other shoe was going to drop. I just didn't know when or how. I used the time to finalize the next stage of my plan. This wasn't just about getting her out. It was about making her face the tangible consequences of her actions. I compiled a detailed invoice. The centerpiece was the excess electricity usage. I calculated the difference between my average bill and the bills from the months she had been running her secret factory, which came to a staggering $487. To that, I added a commercial space usage fee. I researched the average cost of renting a small commercial workshop or storage space in my area, which was about $500 per month. She had been operating for the better part of 3 months, so I added $1,500. Finally, I added a general cleanup and restoration fee of $200 for my time, and the cleaning supplies I had to buy to scrub the wax stains and glitter off my concrete floor. The total came to $2,187. It was a fair, documented, and entirely justified bill. But I wasn't done. I wanted to make sure she understood that her ridiculous squatters' rights claim had real-world legal implications. I had Kyle, Sarah's boyfriend, draft a formal-looking cease and desist letter on his firm's letterhead. It was mostly for show, but it looked incredibly official. It stated that any further attempts to access my property without my explicit, written consent would be considered trespassing and would be met with legal action. It also formally demanded payment for the attached invoice within 30 days. The total cost of having him draft and review the letter was $300, which I happily paid. I then added that legal fee to her bill, bringing the new total to $2,487. I mailed the entire package: the letter, the detailed invoice, and copies of all the supporting evidence to her P.O. box. I sent it via certified mail, requiring her signature upon receipt. There would be no claiming she never got it. A week later, I received the delivery confirmation. She had signed for it. The explosion happened that evening. It wasn't a phone call, it was a physical appearance. I was watching TV when I heard frantic, furious banging on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw Lucy, her face red and contorted with rage, waving a piece of paper in her hand, my invoice. I decided not to open the door. I had nothing more to say to her in person. I simply spoke through the closed door. "What do you want, Lucy?" "You're insane," she shrieked, her voice muffled by the wood. "You're sending me a bill for over $2,000 and a threatening letter from a lawyer? Are you crazy?" "It's not a threat, Lucy. It's a consequence," I called back calmly. "You used my property and my electricity to run your business. You owe me for it. It's all itemized." "I'm not paying you a single cent," she screamed. "This is harassment. I'm going to call the police." "Go ahead," I said, my voice unwavering. "I'd be happy to show them my evidence and the letter from my lawyer. I'm Sir. They'll be very interested to hear about the illegal, uninsured business you were running out of my garage. Trespassing on my property to scream at me probably won't help your case, either." That seemed to take the wind out of her sails. There was a moment of silence. Then, the anger was replaced by her other go-to weapon, tears. I could hear her start to sob, loud, theatrical sobs designed to elicit pity and guilt. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she wailed. "You're my sister. You're supposed to support me. You've always been jealous of my creativity. Now you've ruined my business and you're trying to bankrupt me." I didn't respond. I just stood there, listening to her meltdown on my porch. She kept it up for another 10 minutes, a tirade of accusations and self-pity. Finally, exhausted and getting no reaction, she devolved into a string of curses, threw the crumpled invoice at my door, and stormed off. I waited until I heard her car speed away before I opened the door and calmly picked up the invoice. Her tantrum hadn't changed a thing. The debt was still hers to pay. The 30-day clock was still ticking. The 30-day deadline on the invoice came and went. Unsurprisingly, Lucy did not pay. She had instead embarked on a smear campaign within our extended family, painting me as a cold, heartless monster who had viciously destroyed her burgeoning career out of sheer jealousy. According to her version of events, she had my full permission to use the garage, and I had suddenly, without warning, thrown her out on the street and saddled her with a fabricated, punitive bill. Some relatives, the ones who always coddled Lucy, sent me sanctimonious texts about the importance of family. I ignored them. My parents were caught in the middle, and their attempts to mediate were weak and ineffective. They wanted the problem to just go away, for us to hug and make up. They suggested I should just forgive the debt for the sake of peace. "It's not about the money, Mom," I told her for the 10th time. "It's about the principle. She needs to learn that actions have consequences." I had known she wouldn't pay. Her public meltdown on my porch was proof of that, so I had already planned my next move. I was going to take her to small claims court. The process was straightforward, designed for people to represent themselves without a lawyer. The monetary limit in my state was high enough to cover the debt. It was the perfect venue to force her into accountability. I paid the filing fee, filled out the paperwork, and had her officially served with a court summons. This time, the documents were delivered by a professional process server to her apartment, a move that ensured she couldn't ignore it. The news of a lawsuit sent a shockwave through my family. This was no longer a private dispute. I had made it official, public record. My parents were horrified. "A lawsuit? Sophia, you're suing your own sister," my father exclaimed over the phone. "This will tear the family apart." "Her actions tore the family apart, Dad," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "Her lying, her theft, her utter lack of respect. I'm just cleaning up the mess. She can make this all go away by simply paying what she owes." But of course, she wouldn't. Her ego and her sense of entitlement were too big. She saw herself as the righteous victim. She actually filed a response with the court, a rambling, handwritten document claiming that I had no case, that we had a verbal agreement, and that my invoice was an attempt at extortion. Her delusion knew no bounds. The court date was set for 6 weeks later. In that time, Lucy's candle business, deprived of its free manufacturing facility, completely collapsed. She couldn't afford to rent a real workshop, and her apartment was too small and her landlord too vigilant for her to set up shop there. Her Etsy store went into vacation mode, and her dream of being a candle tycoon fizzled out. This only fueled her resentment toward me. On the day of the hearing, I came prepared. I had a neatly organized binder with copies of everything: the emails, the annotated electricity bills, the photos of my garage-turned factory, the screenshots of her online store, the city ordinances, the invoice, and the certified mail receipt. I was dressed in a simple, professional blouse and slacks. Lucy showed up in a wrinkled t-shirt, looking flustered and angry. She was representing herself. The judge, a no-nonsense older woman, listened patiently as I presented my case. I laid out the timeline of events clearly and concisely, presenting my evidence one piece at a time. I explained the terms of our initial agreement, 2 weeks of storage, how it was violated, and the financial and legal risks I had been subjected to. When it was Lucy's turn, she was a mess. She had no evidence, only emotional appeals and accusations. She talked about her dreams, about how hard she was trying to make something of herself, and how I, her successful sister, had always been jealous. She claimed we had a verbal agreement that she could use the space for as long as she needed. The judge looked at her over her glasses. "Do you have any proof of this agreement, Ms. Lucy's last name? Any emails, any text messages?" Lucy stammered. "No, it was just, a sister thing." The judge then turned to the electricity bills. "Can you explain why your sister's utility costs doubled during the months you were operating your business from her property?" Lucy had no answer. She just mumbled something about it being a cold winter. The verdict was swift and decisive. The judge found entirely in my favor. She called Lucy's actions a flagrant and deceptive abuse of familial trust. She awarded me the full amount on my invoice, $2,487, but she didn't stop there. Because I had won the case, Lucy was also ordered to pay for my court filing fees and the cost of the process server. That added another $213 to her bill. And then, the judge delivered the final, brutal blow. She looked at the photos of the industrial equipment Lucy had been using and cited the city ordinance I had provided. She ordered Lucy to pay a civil penalty directly to me for knowingly creating a hazardous situation on my property, a penalty the judge set at $4,000. The total judgment against my sister was $6,700. Lucy was stunned into silence. The color drained from her face. She had walked into that courtroom a defiant victim and was walking out over $6,000 in debt, with a legal judgment against her that would follow her until she paid it. There was no appeal, no argument. It was over. In the months since, our relationship, predictably, has been non-existent. She has not spoken a single word to me. My parents, after seeing the undeniable outcome of the court case, finally stopped defending her. They are disappointed and heartbroken in both of us, in her for her actions, and in me for my refusal to back down. They still see it as a family tragedy, but they no longer blame me for it. Lucy is now on a court-ordered payment plan, sending me a check for $200 every month. It will take her almost 3 years to pay off her debt. Every time a check arrives, it's not a moment of triumph, but a sad reminder of the sister I lost. I didn't want to ruin her, but I had to protect myself. She called me the bad guy for drawing a line in the sand, but I know I did the right thing. I learned that sometimes, the most responsible and loving thing you can do for someone is to force them to finally face the consequences of their own actions, no matter how much it hurts. My garage is my own again, my life is quiet, and the bond with my sister is broken, perhaps permanently. And I have made peace with that.